This is the host, and today's question is, could the United States and its NATO allies defeat Russia and China in war by 2025? Now this is a tough one. In 2020, I made a similar video entitled USA and NATO vs Russia and China, who would win? It was quite popular and generated a lot of discussion. But since then, things have changed enough that I feel it's time for an update to find out if Team Yankee actually does come out victorious against Team Red. If you want to know more, keep watching. Alright, first up, let's take a look at the contenders. On the blue corner, we have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, a political and military alliance between North America and Europe. As of 2023, it consists of 30 countries. NATO is known for having the most powerful military in the world, with a combined GDP of almost $12 trillion, more than double that of their potential opponents. It also has the most advanced technology and experience fighting modern warfare, thanks to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the core of NATO is the United States, undoubtedly the strongest country in the world, with unmatched hard power. They bring to the table not only the largest military budget, but also the largest nuclear arsenal. Their most advanced weapons are the hypersonic missiles, which can travel at speeds of over Mach 5, making them almost impossible to intercept. The US is also the world leader in cyber warfare and satellites, so they will be critical in any engagement. Then there's Europe, in particular Germany, the UK, and France, and they too have very capable militaries. The German army may no longer be a paper tiger, and they're investing heavily in new equipment. The British have the largest navy in the world, and the French have one of the most technologically advanced air forces. Also fighting alongside them are smaller European nations like Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark, who have invested in joint capabilities and could prove to be a very formidable opponent. On the red corner, we have the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. Together, these two nations make up Team Red. China boasts the second largest military budget in the world behind the US and is quickly developing new technologies. They've been investing heavily in artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and quantum computing. They have also developed the world's first fully functional aircraft carrier. However, most of their equipment is still considered to be of medium quality. That's because a majority of their forces are designed for fighting a near-peer conflict in the Pacific Ocean, not a global war. Russia also has a large military with the fourth largest budget in the world. It may not be as well funded as the other teams, but it is certainly the most experienced. Since 2014, they have been fighting a major conflict in Ukraine, where they have tested some of the world's most advanced anti-tank weapons and learned how to fight against superior firepower. They've also honed their skills fighting against numerically superior forces. During that same time period, they've also been modernizing their military and testing new technologies such as the hypersonic missiles, which may be the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield. They have the largest supply of nuclear weapons in the world, with over 89% of all warheads being tactical battlefield weapons. This gives them the ability to strike anywhere in the world from submarines and ships in the Pacific Ocean. Russia is also a world leader in space and electronic warfare. Its hypersonic missiles would be difficult for NATO forces to shoot down, and even if they did, the remaining missiles could potentially disable many of NATO's communication and surveillance systems. Finally, they have the world's largest stockpile of chemical weapons, giving them the ability to inflict massive casualties on enemy troops. So who do you think will win? Will it be NATO or Russia and China? Let me know in the comments section below. Okay, so what would a war between these two alliances look like? First, there would be a lot of saber rattling. Both sides would want to avoid direct conflict and would try to gain the upper hand through diplomacy. However, it's likely that neither side would trust the other's intentions and start moving forces into place. For NATO, this would mean sending reinforcements to Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. For Russia and China, it would mean continuing to build up their forces in the Pacific Ocean and along the border with NATO. Eventually, one small incident would occur that sparks the conflict. Maybe a NATO patrol ship gets too close to Russian waters. Maybe a Chinese fighter jet intercepts an American spy plane. Whatever it is, once fighting breaks out, it will be intense. In fact, it would probably begin with a surprise attack. In modern warfare, Stealth is key, and the side that launches the first strike will most likely have the advantage. For Russia and China, the attack would likely come from the east. Massive cyber attacks would target NATO infrastructure. Air defenses would be overwhelmed by swarms of cheap but effective drones. And before NATO knew what was happening, Russian paratroopers would seize key objectives in Eastern Europe. Simultaneously, Chinese forces would invade Taiwan and secure key air bases to prevent any American intervention. With the element of surprise on their side, Russia and China could make significant gains. The vast number of NATO troops stationed far from home in Europe would be quickly surrounded. The Russian army, with its experience fighting in Ukraine, would be able to hold them off. Meanwhile, Chinese forces would race across Taiwan to secure key government buildings and infrastructure. The Chinese military has already studied Taiwan's terrain and conducted live fire drills to simulate an invasion. They would be well prepared. However, as the fighting dragged on, NATO's advantages would become apparent. While Russia and China might be able to hold off NATO forces in the short term, eventually the sheer firepower would overwhelm their defenses. NATO would launch massive airstrikes against Russian and Chinese positions. The Russian and Chinese air forces would be decimated, and their ground forces would be forced to retreat. Of course, Russia and China would not go down without a fight. They would use every advantage available to them, including chemical weapons and cyber attacks. However, NATO was prepared for this. In fact, they were expecting it. NATO forces would wear protective gear to defend against chemical weapons, and their sophisticated electronics would be shielded against cyber attacks. NATO also had something else that Russia and China didn't: time. Most of the NATO countries were not at war in 2023. They had not been fighting for years. Their soldiers were fresh and ready to go. Not so for Russia and China. Their soldiers had been fighting for a long time. They were tired and needed a break. By 2025, most of the NATO countries would have rotated their forces through and would be fighting at full strength. Russia and China would not be able to say the same. Eventually, NATO forces would push deep into Russian and Chinese territory. They would liberate Eastern Europe and Taiwan. And finally, they would storm the Kremlin and Beijing. It would be a decisive victory for NATO. But what if the unthinkable happens? What if NATO and the United States face off against a united front of Russia and China? That would be a much closer fight. It would be a war that could go either way. There are simply too many variables to consider. How would the Korean Peninsula react? Which side would Japan and India back? How would the Middle East react? Would the oil spigots turn off? Could Iran or North Korea jump at the chance to start a war of their own? So who knows? Maybe we'll save that scenario for another video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. It really helps us grow. And as always, remember to stay tuned for more.